I count more than 25 of you. That's really, really good. And for those of you that were out late last night, thanks for getting up. I really appreciate it. So today I'm talking about something I don't usually talk about, but something that's very, very near and dear to me. I'm talking about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So you know, this is me, Lynne. Now, for those of you who know Juniper, you know that we've always been driven by purpose. I like to say we're mission made. And today I want to talk about why ESG, what we used to call corporate social responsibility, is actually not a problem, but it's really good for business. In fact, Juniper's a little different. Our capital stack is a bit different. And in the beginning, we sold ourselves as a way to invest in our industry, doing well by doing good. So make money, but at the same time, make sure you do it in a way that improves the lives of elders. So that was important. So let me tell you the story of how I learned this, how I learned to really put that out there. My investors were one thing. I was part of the Social Venture Network. Anyone ever hear of that? Really cool people were involved in that. But anyway, when I started Juniper, I got involved with that. That was great. A lot of my investors came out of there. Once we got started, we were buying properties, and we needed debt. And so at the time, this is 1988. Who was in the industry in 1988? A couple, two. Okay, well, anybody hear of Beverly Enterprises? Remember Beverly Enterprises? Yeah, well, at the time, they were beginning to have some problems, and those problems really hurt our industry at that time. All of a sudden, people were so worried about the state of our buildings and what we were doing, the financial well-being of those communities, that they decided that they were going to stop investing for a while. So the markets were really shutting down for the thing I wanted to do, which was to raise money to buy properties and start Juniper. So we had gotten a meeting with the Bank of Boston. Now, the Bank of Boston is no more. It became Sovereign, and I believe it's Bank of America today, what's left of it. But I got a meeting, and I went up to the Bank of Boston. So I live in New Jersey, flew up to Boston. Big deal when you're starting a company. I go in, I've got my pitch deck, and there are 3 or 4 people sitting around. And I do my thing. I thought, you know, I did a pretty good job. But I knew by looking at them that there was no way in hell anyone was going to give me any money right then. And it wasn't because of me. It was because of the industry. But as we're leaving, the youngest person in the room, an associate, gets up and she says, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure, you can ask me anything. I mean, why not?" And she said, "Well, why are you doing this?" And I looked at her and I knew I wasn't going to get the money. And I said, "Well, do you really want to know why I'm in this?" And she said, "Yeah, I really want to know." And I said, "Well, I really believe we can make a difference in the lives of seniors. And I really believe that we can use our industry as an example of doing well by doing good." I'm cutting to the chase here because I have a limited amount of time. And she turned to me and she said, "I'm so glad." And I knew I had connected with her. I also knew that if they had money to give, she was going to be my biggest advocate. And so I learned early on that speaking your mind, which as you know I do quite well, but speaking about mission, speaking about what you believe and what our purpose is, what we're all here to do, take care of older adults, is very important. And that has served as Juniper's North Star. That CSR, corporate social responsibility, the willingness to do well by doing good has always been what we're about. So today I'm talking about this thing called ESG. Now, why is ESG important? What does it all mean for us? Why do you even care about it? And most importantly, can it help us align with capital? How many believe there's a dislocation between operators and capital? Nobody? Are you serious? Okay, thank you, Steve, I appreciate that. These days, it's really hard to find alignment. And you would think that ESG is not one of those things. But today, I'm going to tell you how that works. So every public company, I want to know who here operates for Ventas, for Welltower, for Chartwell, for PGIM, and I am forgetting one other. Give me a minute here. Help me out, Kelly, if you're in the audience. Oh, Bridge Seniors. Come on, I want to see hands. Who operates for them? Are there only vendors in the room? Not a single one of you operates for Welltower or Ventas? I don't believe that for a minute. Okay, well, one. I got one. So that's good. I'm surprised. The operators must have been out partying last night because I know there are people here who operate for them. All of them are have to care about ESG. Why? Well, I don't know how many of you are aware, the SEC has proposed a climate risk disclosure rule. So you know public companies have to disclose a lot of things to the SEC, and one of the things that was put up to include in that disclosure is how you and your company is affecting climate change. What are you doing about climate change? Now, you'd think that that wasn't important to operators, but there's something called Scope 2 and Scope 3 reporting. And what that means is they're not just looking at Welltower as a company, they're looking at Welltower's holdings. And they're saying, Welltower, you invest in real estate. And what is that real estate contributing to our climate betterment or challenges? And they're saying, you got to report on that. And so what does that mean for us? It means they're going to come to us. How many people have had folks come to them and say, tell us what you're doing about ESG? It started last year. You got a little form that said, tell us what you're doing about ESG. Anybody else in the room get one? I got one. Anyway, my point is, it's here for you. What I want to talk about today is how we can collectively align around something that I believe is very important. I think many of you believe it's very important. So what are our big issues? You know, most of you are probably sitting there saying, holy crow, here she goes again. She's talking about this stuff that's way out there. What does it mean for us? Well, I'm an operator, right? I've got the same issues you do. Occupancy is coming back. Backdoor is still a problem, right? But we've still got these problems on the expense side. We've got staffing issues. We've got higher expenses. At Juniper, our utilities are 18% over where they were. Our staffing costs have gone up 23%. These are big issues if you want to actually make money, break even and make money. Many of us are just getting back to break even. I know that that's not commonly talked about, but I think it's true. Anyway, so our issues are big ones, and we don't think about them in terms of ESG. But what are our owners thinking about? Well, they too are concerned about margins. They've got pressure. They've got debt compliance issues. So they care about the same things we do, but they've also got this thing, this public reporting requirement that's coming. They've got to think about that. And so you get that little survey and it says, go for it. So can we align? Is there a way for us to work together? And today I want to talk a little bit about that. So ESG, you might think is a challenge. I think of it as an opportunity. And this is our chance to reframe what we do. What I want to do today is give you a couple of examples, but most importantly, talk to you about a mindset shift. When someone comes to you and says, help us report on ESG, think about what you do within a different framework. So under environment, right, what do? Well, we're all concerned about utility savings. I said Juniper's up 18%. If we could cut into that, it may not sound like a lot, but it actually is meaningful to our bottom line. And how do we do that? Well, LED light fixtures. There are new devices that can regulate HVAC temperature control. No, we're not going to put them in every apartment, but we can put them in public areas. And I don't know about you, but about 40 to 50% of my buildings are public areas. So that can have a real impact. Single-use plastics. How many of you are still passing meds in those little plastic cups? You can eliminate those. You can take the plastic out of your dining room, right? Believe it or not only is that good for the environment, but it saves a lot of money. Biophilics, accessible nature, I'm not going to go into that, but obviously that's air quality. Social. Most people don't talk about social. I want to talk about staffing. I want to talk about wages. I want to talk about training and development today. At Juniper, we put in a program called 15 by 20. So $15 by 2020, we started in 2015. It was a little ahead of its time. It was our attempt to provide living wages to the industry. We got there by 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and then all hell broke loose. And so $15 is not necessarily enough. But for those of us who are at $15 an hour, and I believe most of us are, that is in this world considered a living wage. Talk about it. Talk about it. It makes sense. And to your capital sources, that's important to them. Training and development. Richard Hutchinson yesterday talked a lot about training and development. He talked about that new program. That's who do we serve? Who are our people? They're typically undereducated women. They are one of those groups that are targeted for career development support. You're already doing it. Vaccination, healthy workplaces, that also falls under S. I know we had a very assertive vaccination policy for our staff and our residents. It made a huge difference in terms of our ability to deal with the later stages of the pandemic. It also created the sense of a safe workplace. So those are important under social. Governance, I'm gonna toot our horn, and I'd love to be able to toot other horns. Who do we serve? Women. Who works for us? Women. How many of you have a gender balance board? We do, and we always have, and I'm very, very proud of it. But that's an example of a governance activity that makes sense. It's not just about gender balance, about the DEI portion. It's also about reflecting your stakeholders. Transparency, Sebi talked about transparency, huge. Clear communication, also huge. And I'm talking too much. I wanted to give you some examples. So what is Capital doing about that other than giving us forms to fill out? Well, there are a couple of people that are doing some really, really cool things. So these 5 REITs got together, Sabra, Omega, LTC, Care Trust, and NHI. I'm on Sabra's board, so full disclosure, and we lease some buildings from LTC. So I work with 2 of these. They got together and they said, we gotta do this ESG thing. Let's figure out what we can do together. Now, you can't collude, but you can be educated together, and you can talk to vendors who can help put in place the kind of energy saving devices that both save money and meet ESG requirements. So they got together, 5 REITs, 1,900 properties, 75 operators, approximately 75 managed properties, which are scope 2, and 1,800 triple net lease or finance properties, which are equivalent to the scope 3 that I was talking about. This is an example of people coming together. What they're doing is learning about things that actually can help the bottom line, while at the same time helping the environment and social and governance responsibilities they have. Now, many of you say, how am I gonna afford LEDs? What am I gonna, this HVAC stuff, that costs money. Lynn, what are you talking about? We don't have money these days. Well, at Sabra, we said, okay, if we want people to do this, we've got to support it. So we're supporting it in 2 ways. Number 1, we are helping people understand where they are in terms of energy use in particular. And so we're giving people the ability to use an outside third party to measure their utility use, their energy efficiency. But the second thing we do, and I'm very proud of this, and I had a role in it, I'm proud to say as well, is that we provided capital. So we came up with a loan fund idea. So we would loan money to buy these energy saving devices, to install them, to get training for our staff, and we would, through the savings, generate the payments, the interest payments back to the REIT. So we've just started this in the last year, but I think this is a really good example of people coming together to align their interests. We all care about the bottom line, and we all need to care about this, whether forced by the government or because it's the right thing to do. And about the right thing to do, this is Pete Nyland. Some of you may have known him. He's been around for a long time. He's my colleague at Sabra, but I'm really proud of him. He said, you know, ESG investment should not be viewed from a financial perspective only. There are other benefits. And then he said to me, he said, Lynn, it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to leave you with that. And right now, I'd like to ask Kelly Worden, who's over here, to come up. The second part of our discussion is with Kelly. Kelly is a subject matter expert. And she has, she's unique. She has both public health experience, and she's been working in the real estate and sustainability effort in that area of the world for the last 10 years. In the last 8 years, from 2015 on, she's worked in ESG specifically. I think she's most proud of an initiative called GRESB, which is really a health-oriented assessment of ESG within properties, within real estate. And she can tell you more about that. I just bungled that horribly, Kelly.
No,
but welcome.
Thank
welcome.
You. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I'll just briefly talk about what GRESB is. It's an ESG benchmark that was created in 2009 out of Amsterdam. And so the 5 companies that Lynn rattled off at this top, Ventus, Welltower, PJM, they all participate within GRESB. It's a way to drive transparency between the investors and the owners and fund managers of real estate. What's really exciting to me about the moment that we're all in now, so again, that benchmark has been running since 2009, that's quite a while. But what's happening now with the increasing awareness of ESG and other parts of the value chain getting engaged, it provides a really interesting opportunity, as Lynn was saying, for that value alignment throughout different decision-making levels.
So, Kelly, I have tried today to talk about the misconceptions around ESG. Can you add your perspective on why ESG is important and maybe help further dispel those misconceptions?
Absolutely. So the thing that has gotten quite confused in the US, particularly given some of the media coverage around ESG, is that ESG at its core is really rooted in risk mitigation, which is very distinct from impact investing, for instance. Impact investing, and more traditionally the corporate social responsibility angle, is really focused on creating positive impact with revenue generation as a secondary outcome, whereas ESG traditionally is pretty narrowly focused in risk identification and mitigation. But what it provides is the framework for understanding those non-financial sources of risk and opportunity within the environmental, social, and governance pillar. So a lot of the things that I've heard talked about at the conference thus far really do very much fall within that risk mitigation approach, things around staffing and making sure you've got your eye on changing consumer preferences and sort of identifying those trends and then creating strategies to address them. The other angle that I think is important is, while there is a distinction between ESG and impact investing, the ESG approach is rooted in the understanding that where you have impacts on environmental, social, and governance issues is also where you might be exposed to risk, and where there are opportunities to create value and differentiate yourself in a positive way within the market to make yourself available and open to new sources of capital and financing.
Cool. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
You did a great job on that. I really appreciate your adding to my comments there. So, Kelly, I'm going to skip to a question that I had further down, but messaging is so important. You know, you and I are talking about a framework, right? We're saying that we do a lot of these things anyway. It's reframing them to talk about both the impact we have on ESG, and for reporting purposes, but also the impact we can have on the bottom line and on people's lives. So talk to us about messaging. What can we do to get that word out and to think about this differently?
Absolutely. I think, as you were saying earlier, it's really important to be celebrating your achievements and your performance. There's different ways of doing that. There are a number of different ESG reporting frameworks that provide guidance on that. Platforms such as GRESB, which is a benchmark, provides opportunities to really tell your story. At the International Well Building Institute, we have something called the Well Standard, which is another way to both guide action and also celebrate progress. But I think it's important to be explicit about your goals and also your impacts in a way that can help drive that alignment with other parts of your value chain. And if we do have mostly vendors in the room, I think that's an important thing in the sense of how you engage with those operators as well, and just viewing the growing acknowledgement of ESG as an opportunity to really add credibility to your statements, and be prepared for forthcoming regulation as well. But when it comes to, I think, from a senior living perspective, thinking internally around how do you communicate, to your own employees what you're doing for them in a way that really drives staff, retention and engagement, but then also externally communicating how you're thinking about your residents, your consumers, and the ways that you're building into the way you design your property or the way you run your programs, the things that you're hoping to achieve for them. So in that way, very kind of traditional marketing oriented, but being a little bit more explicit about it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. One more question. Maybe you can leave us with some examples of ESG efforts that have promoted healthier environments. And if you can, focus on the ones that actually have a financial return, have ROI for us, that will actually help us improve our margins.
Yes, I am so excited. So as Lynn said, my background is in public health, and I've worked within sustainable real estate my entire career because within the public health community, there's always been research that the built environment matters to health at a more aggregate macro level. So we've got a lot of the research around urban planning and the urban scale and its relation to health. It's only been more recently over the past 2 decades, really, that there's been more looking at specifically building design and its impact on health and well-being. And so over the past 10 years, there's been a number of studies that are showing the connection between real estate design and operation and occupant health and well-being and satisfaction. At IWBI, we're really excited to have just actually a couple months ago released this Investing in Health Pays Back campaign. It's a very beautiful landing page that, as with everything that IWBI does, but that has compiled all of the various research on these different studies around both ROI, but critically the impact that it's actually having on people. And so there was a study that was released at the end of last year looking at well-certified spaces and finding actual significant increases in perceived well-being amongst occupants, in perceived mental health, on the office, some of the work that's been done in the office setting that's also associated with increased productivity. And then there's also studies on more of the real estate financial performance side showing increase in rents per square foot, increase in tenant retention, and things like that. And so we definitely have that growing body of evidence to say not only is this really having the impact that we hope that it has on occupants, but also having that additional financial benefit from a real estate finance perspective too.
Good, thank you. So if you're putting together the messaging with that kind of report, with that research that shows ROI, I think it's really important for us to understand how we can use something like that. So what Kelly's talking about is a report that looks at returns on doing some of this work. Now, it may not be directly applicable to the work that we're doing every day, but it gives you a reference point, and it says, if we do this, we can have this return. So when you message, you can actually go to that report and use the various sources that are mentioned and some of that research to justify some of the work that you're doing. I think it's really important. My final question to you, Kelly, is do you know of any other sources or partners, capital partners, that are supporting ESG efforts much like Sabra is?
Yeah, well, I was going to mention the growing field of sustainable finance, which is quite exciting. There's a couple of different financial mechanisms that fall under the sustainable finance umbrella. Green bonds were the initial ones, social bonds, increasingly sustainability-linked loans, and those actually have associated KPIs with them. And so there's a number of financial institutions that are setting really explicit sustainable finance goals. I was just reviewing Citigroup's ESG report, and they've got very high explicit goals around how much financing they want to deploy under their sustainability umbrella. So that's definitely something to be aware of. And again, one of those opportunities where being explicit about your ESG goals makes you a better aligned partner and recipient of some of those financing funds. And so that's something to keep an eye on. And we've been excited to monitor within the health and well-being space that our WELL certification standards actually being included in some of those sustainability-linked loans also as a KPI. So using that as a way to really measure and prove that you had the impact and met the performance that you said you would.
So, summarizing, ESG is here. It's not going away. Our capital sources, those who provide us money, whether it's a REIT or a bank, Citibank as another example, they need to look at this. They care about this. They are measured based on their what they're doing and on their impact, which means we are going to be measured on it. Now, I think we can use that to our advantage. We have big issues. Our day-to-day is looking at staffing issues, is figuring out how we're going to use new technology. Bottom line is our bottom line. We've got to improve our margins. And these are ways to do it. And it's a way for us to reframe some of what we do to show capital that we can actually align, that we can be partners. And that's my message to you today. This is not instead of your bigger issues. This is dealing with your bigger issues and reframing the discussion so that you can develop greater alignment with people. So I think we're down to a minute. I don't know if anyone has a really pressing question. Otherwise, I see Michael standing up. No pressing questions. Well, Kelly will be here. I'm off, but I am so grateful to all of you. Michael, thank you so much.
No.
And Kelly, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. That was an excellent discussion.